Why was she the only one standing? The projector hummed, throwing faded light across the briefing room walls. The table was lined with maps, topographic ridges, contour lines, elevation markers, all forming the outline of a valley that looked more like a scar carved into the earth. Soldiers sat with their hands folded, their faces drawn tight, waiting for someone else to speak first. But no one did. The silence was suffocating. So she broke it, not with words but with movement. Captain Elena Reyes pushed back her chair and stood. The sound of her boots scraping the tile echoed across the sterile room. That one step forward wasn't grand, wasn't loud. It was quiet, deliberate, and it changed everything. The colonel at the head of the table shifted in his seat. Captain Reyes. His tone carried warning, maybe disbelief. But she didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed on the map, on the shaded area that represented the hollow. A valley drenched in darkness even under a full moon, a place where radios sputtered, signals died, and patrols had vanished without leaving so much as a trail. Every unit that had entered had returned, less. Some had returned missing men. Others returned missing voices, their eyes hollowed out, their courage stripped away by something unseen. And now this room was filled with soldiers who had heard all the stories, who had seen the casualty reports, who knew what that valley meant. So when the colonel asked for volunteers, no one moved. No one wanted their name written next to the word advance. Until her. Elena's chest rose slowly as she took that step forward, as if her lungs had to remind her body that air still existed. The colonel leaned back studying her. His voice was quieter this time. "You'll take point." She nodded once. It wasn't pride, it wasn't recklessness, it was something far simpler. A promise. But she didn't say that out loud. She never did. Around the table, chairs creaked. Some soldiers glanced down at their hands, others exchanged quick looks. She could feel their questions pressing against her back. Why her? Why now? Does she think she's better than us? One pair of eyes lingered longer than the rest. Sergeant Hale. Salt and pepper beard, eyes like weathered stone, a man whose silence was often louder than orders. He didn't speak, but his expression did. You're either braver than the rest of us, or you're not coming back. Elena met his gaze, held it for a second, then turned back to the map. That was answer enough. The colonel finally broke the tension. Fine, Reyes, you take lead. Operation begins at 200, dismissed. The meeting dissolved. Boots scraped, voices murmured. Soldiers left in clusters, whispering low but not low enough. She heard them, she always did. She's reckless. She's trying to prove something. She won't last a night out there. But they didn't know. They didn't know the weight behind her silence. The reason she always volunteered first. The ghost she carried into every mission. Outside, the air was colder, sharper. The camp perimeter lights cast shallow circles against the endless dark, but beyond them the valley waited black, unbroken, devouring the horizon. Elena stopped at the edge of the light and let her breath fog the air. It wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was memory. Another valley, another night, another silence pressing down like a suffocating blanket. She wasn't a captain then, she was barely a lieutenant, and she wasn't leading. She was following her brother. His voice came back to her in fragments, the way the wind sometimes carries whispers you can't quite catch. We go forward because someone has to. And maybe, just maybe, we light the path for others. But he hadn't come back from that mission. His step lit the path, yes, but she was the one left to walk it alone. She had worn his patch on her sleeve ever since. Not officially, regulations didn't allow it, but hidden, stitched into the inside of her jacket, close to her skin. A reminder pressed against her every time she moved. That was her real reason for stepping forward tonight. Not glory, not recognition, but a promise she had made to herself years ago: if no one else moves, I will. The radio on her hip crackled, pulling her back. Hale's voice low and steady. We move in 10. 10 minutes. 10 minutes until the first boot touched that soil. 10 minutes until darkness swallowed them whole. Her hand tightened on her rifle strap. She turned toward the barracks, the glow of faint yellow light spilling through half-open doors. Inside, soldiers were prepping, strapping on gear, checking weapons. The smell of oil and sweat mixed with the metallic tang of anticipation. She moved through them silently. No words, just nods. A private muttered something under his breath, too soft for others to catch, not too soft for her. She won't make it. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, she sat on her bunk and pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. A letter, unsent, always unsent. Her handwriting, rushed and uneven. If I don't come back, maybe this letter will say what I couldn't. But the letter was unfinished. It always was, because who would she send it to? Her mother, who still couldn't say her brother's name without breaking. Her father's grave, where words would only echo back into silence. She folded it again and slid it back into her pocket. Some things were never meant to be sent. The door opened. Hale stepped in, his presence filling the small room without a sound. He didn't look at her directly, just adjusted the strap on his vest. "You sure about this?" he asked, his tone flat but not unkind. She looked up at him, steady. "Are you?" For the first time, a faint crack in his composure, a ghost of a smile. "Fair enough." That was all. No pep talk, no promises, just acknowledgement. The squad gathered, packs on, rifles ready, faces pale in the dim light. One soldier, barely 20, whispered something about his kid sister back home. Another adjusted the chain around his neck, the dog tags clinking faintly. For a brief second, they were just people again, brothers, sons, fathers, friends. Fragile in ways the uniform couldn't hide. Elena watched them, memorizing each face, not because she expected them all to return, because she knew some wouldn't. "Time," Hale said. They filed out. The night swallowed them one by one until only the crunch of boots on dirt marked their presence. Elena stepped into the dark last. The lights of the camp faded behind her. Ahead the valley yawned open, vast and endless, a shadow that seemed alive. The silence deepened. Even the crickets fell quiet. The first step down into the valley was harder than she expected. The soil shifted under her boot, loose rock crunching softly. She froze for a moment, heart hammering against her ribs, every nerve screaming to turn back. But she didn't. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, breathed once, and moved forward. One step, then another, then another. The valley seemed to close around them, its walls rising, its silence pressing heavier with each pace. Someone whispered behind her, "Feels wrong down here." Hale's voice cut low, steady. "Eyes open, keep moving." But Elena heard something else. Not words, not sound, something inside her. A memory, a whisper, her brother's voice. "If no one else moves, you will." Her throat tightened. She blinked hard, kept walking. The darkness covered the valley, but her single step forward lit the path none dared to walk. And yet there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Something that could change everything. Why did the silence feel heavier than the air? Every step deeper into the valley made the world quieter. The crunch of boots against loose gravel should have echoed, but it didn't. Sound seemed to die after a few feet, swallowed by invisible walls. Radios crackled once, then hissed into static before falling completely silent. Captain Elena Reyes glanced at her wrist display. The signal indicator had gone flat. No surprise. They'd been warned. Still, the silence dug under her skin like cold fingers. Her squad followed in staggered formation. Shadows moved with them, long and bent across the uneven ground. Sergeant Hale, a few steps behind her, checked their flanks without a word. The hollow wasn't supposed to feel alive, and yet it did. A faint metallic clink broke the stillness. Private Mendez adjusted the buckle on his pack, muttering a curse under his breath. His voice sounded wrong, clipped, distant, as if the valley itself resisted letting it travel. Elena raised her hand, fist closed, halt. The squad froze. She scanned the terrain, steep walls on either side, jagged rocks cutting into the sky like broken teeth. No movement, no glint of steel, just darkness pressing down. Her mind reached back to the last report, a patrol 2 weeks ago. They'd entered this same valley with 12 men. Only 3 came out. The survivors spoke of nothing concrete. No ambush, no firefight, just disorientation, confusion, men vanishing in the dark. "Captain," Hale whispered, voice low enough for only her, "you see something." She shook her head once, but her gut screamed otherwise. Her boots shifted on loose stone as she crouched, pressing a gloved hand against the ground. The dirt was colder than it should have been. Damp. She rubbed it between her fingers, watching it crumble. The hollow held secrets, and every inch of her body told her those secrets weren't meant to be found. Still forward, always forward. She rose, gave a shorthand signal, and moved. The squad followed. Minutes bled into hours, or maybe it was only 30 minutes. Time lost its shape here. Elena kept her eyes on the jagged path, counting each step, forcing herself into rhythm. Left, right, left, right. Her thoughts threatened to wander, but she pulled them back. Focus was survival. Still, ghosts had their ways of slipping in. Her brother's voice again, clearer now. "One step is all it takes, Elena, just one step." She tightened her grip on the rifle. The memories hurt, but they also anchored her. Behind her, Private Novick whispered, "This place feels wrong." Hale hushed him quickly, but Elena didn't scold. She understood. Fear had to go somewhere, and words were sometimes the only outlet. Still, Novick's words stuck. Feels wrong, he wasn't lying. The path narrowed. Cliffs rose higher, blotting out even the pale light of the stars. The valley became a tunnel, black and endless. Then a sound. Not boots, not gear, something else. A faint hollow echo, like stone striking stone. Elena stopped cold, raising her hand again. The squad froze behind her, breath caught in collective silence. The sound came again, clink, echo, faint but deliberate. She scanned the ridge lines. Nothing, no movement. Her pulse quickened. Hale moved up beside her, his whisper sharp. "You think it's them?" She didn't answer, didn't want to voice what both were thinking. Instead, she crouched low, signaling the squad to hug the cliff wall. They moved in silence, boots brushing loose gravel, rifles ready. The sound faded, then silence again. Minutes passed, no attack, no ambush, just the oppressive quiet pressing harder, heavier. Her throat felt dry. She swallowed against it, her ears straining for anything. Nothing. "Maybe rockfall," Hale muttered, but his tone lacked conviction. She nodded, though she didn't believe it either. They moved again. The valley floor dipped, sloping downward into a basin. Pools of stagnant water reflected faint light, their surfaces trembling despite the absence of wind. Elena scanned the pools carefully. No ripples from movement, just trembling as though the ground itself pulsed. She crouched, dipping 2 fingers into the water. It was warmer than the air. She pulled back quickly, wiped her hand against her uniform. Her skin prickled. Something about this place defied nature. "Captain?" Mendez asked, his voice taut. She shook her head. "Keep moving." The squad crossed the basin carefully, boots splashing faintly in the shallow water. Every sound seemed amplified here, their breaths, the metallic clink of gear. The tension climbed with each step. Halfway across, Private Novick stumbled. His boot slipped into a deeper pocket of water. He cursed, jerking his leg free. Then everyone froze. Because they heard it. An echo, but not from Novick. It came from deeper in the valley. A single step. Elena's chest tightened. Her rifle rose instinctively, sights scanning the darkness. "Contact," Hale whispered. She didn't answer, she couldn't. Because the step hadn't sounded like boots, it hadn't sounded like stone, it had sounded like her brother. She blinked hard, shaking the thought. No, impossible, memory, nothing more. But the step came again, closer. The squad shifted nervously. Mendez raised his rifle, finger hovering near the trigger. Hale shot him a sharp look, motioning him to lower it. Elena raised her fist. Hold. Every muscle in her body coiled tight. The darkness ahead seemed to thicken, as though it carried weight. And then silence again. No more steps. Her heart hammered. She forced a slow breath, lowered her rifle slightly, gestured forward. The squad obeyed, reluctant, nervous, but obedient. They reached the far side of the basin, climbing a narrow trail that twisted upward along the cliff wall. The higher they went, the heavier the silence pressed. Her lungs burned with each breath, though the air was no thinner. At the top, the trail leveled out into a plateau. Jagged stones jutted like broken monuments. The ground was littered with fragments, shards of rusted metal, cracked helmets, scraps of fabric long decayed. Elena crouched, lifting a fragment of steel, a name etched faintly into it, too worn to read. She set it down gently. The squad moved among the debris silently, their faces pale in the dim light. They all knew what this was, not a battlefield, a graveyard. The hollow didn't just take men, it kept them. Elena's throat tightened. She could almost see her brother's face in the shadows. Hale crouched beside her, his voice was low. How many do you think? She shook her head. Too many. He exhaled slowly. His silence said more than words. They moved on, step by step, deeper into the plateau. The air grew colder, though the ground felt warmer. Contradictions everywhere. Nature bent out of shape. Private Novak whispered again, voice cracking. We shouldn't be here. Elena stopped, turned, met his eyes. Her voice was steady, though softer than usual. We're here because others didn't come back. That's why. Novak swallowed hard, nodded. But she could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe it. Neither did she, not fully. Still forward, always forward. As they pressed deeper into the plateau, Elena's thoughts circled back to the one thing she hadn't told them. The reason she wasn't afraid of this valley in the same way they were. The reason she had stepped forward when no one else did. Because she had been here before. And the valley had taken something from her once. But not everything, not yet. Why did the air suddenly taste like iron? Elena noticed it first. A metallic tang on her tongue, faint but unmistakable, like blood carried on the wind. Only there was no wind here. No breeze, no rustle, no movement. Just the oppressive weight of the hollow pressing down on them. She slowed her pace, raising her fist. The squad halted instantly. Their breaths puffed into the stillness, loud against the silence. Do you smell that? She asked, her voice low. Hale lifted his head, nostrils flaring. He gave a curt nod. The others shifted uneasily, exchanging looks. Novak muttered, like rust. But Elena knew better. It wasn't rust. It was memory. Her mind pulled her back years to the night her brother hadn't come home. The telegram. The folded flag. The metallic taste of grief sitting heavy in her mouth as she stood at his grave, unable to breathe. She blinked hard, forced herself back. Focus. Not then, now. Stay sharp, she whispered. They pressed forward, boots crunching softly on loose rock. The plateau stretched wider, dotted with jagged formations that cast long, crooked shadows, shapes that looked too much like figures standing still. Private Mendez whispered, feels like we're being watched. Hale's voice cut him off steady, eyes forward. But Elena didn't scold Mendez. She felt it too. Each shadow seemed to twitch at the edge of her vision, like movement caught just beyond recognition. She tightened her grip on the rifle, her finger brushing the trigger guard. A sound broke the silence. Soft hollow. Not stone this time, not boots, something else. A low hum, almost below hearing, vibrating against her chest more than her ears. The squad froze again. "What the hell is that?" Novik whispered. No one answered. The hum grew faintly, then faded, leaving a deeper silence in its wake. Elena exhaled slowly. Her eyes swept the jagged terrain, searching for the source. Nothing, just the hollow breathing against them. Her thoughts turned inward. Is this what broke the others, the silence, the sounds that weren't sounds? She shook it off. Forward, always forward. The path narrowed again, forcing them into single file between towering slabs of stone. The walls rose high, blotting out what little sky remained. Claustrophobic, smothering. Elena's breath came faster, though she forced her pace steady. Then she heard it. Not the hum, not a step, a voice. Soft, familiar. Elena. Her chest locked. She spun, rifle raised, eyes scanning the darkness behind them. Nothing, just her squad. Novik flinched at her sudden movement. "Captain." She froze, pulse thundering in her ears. No one else had heard it. The voice hadn't come from behind. It had come from inside. Her brother. Elena forward. Her stomach twisted. She blinked hard, forcing her rifle down. She couldn't let them see her hesitation. Couldn't let them know the hollow was clawing at her mind. "Move," she ordered, voice sharper than intended. The squad obeyed. They pushed deeper into the narrow path. The walls pressed tighter, the shadows darker. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. Mendez muttered a prayer under his breath. Novik kept glancing back. Hale stayed close to Elena, his silence heavier than ever. Finally, the passage opened. They stepped into a clearing. And froze. The ground was littered with gear. Helmets, rifles, packs, scattered across the dirt like discarded shells. Some were rusted, others still intact. Dog tags glinted faintly in the dim light. No bodies. Just absence. Novik whispered, "Jesus Christ." His voice cracked, too loud against the silence. Elena crouched, lifting a helmet. Scratched, dented, but still bearing the faded insignia of a unit she recognized. One of the patrols that had vanished. Her throat tightened. She set it down gently, almost reverently. Hale knelt beside a rifle, his fingers brushing the stock. No signs of a fight. "No blood," Elena added. The squad spread out cautiously, their movements tense. Mendez picked up a dog tag, his hands shaking. He whispered the name under his breath, then slipped it into his pocket. Novik muttered, "Where the hell are they? Where'd they go?" No one answered. Elena's eyes swept the clearing. The gear wasn't scattered randomly. It formed a rough line leading deeper into the hollow. A trail. Her chest tightened. She signaled the squad to regroup. Their faces were pale, eyes wide. Fear was eating them alive. "We follow," she said, voice steady. Novik's head snapped up. "Follow? Are you serious?" Her gaze locked on his. "We're here to find out what happened. This is what happened." His jaw clenched. His eyes burned with something between fear and anger, but he said nothing. Hale's silence was different. He studied her carefully, as though seeing the crack beneath her composure. They moved. The trail of gear led them through another narrow passage, winding deeper. The metallic taste in the air grew stronger. The silence pressed harder. And then another sound. Faint, distant. Footsteps. Not theirs. Elena froze. The squad froze with her. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, coming closer. Her heart pounded, her rifle rose. Then the voice again. "Elena." Clearer this time, right in front of her. Her breath caught. She saw him. Her brother. Standing in the darkness ahead, half hidden in shadow. Uniform torn, face pale, eyes steady. Her chest caved in, her legs trembled. It couldn't be. She blinked. And he was gone. Just darkness. Her breath shuddered, her rifle wavered. Hale's voice cut through the silence, low and sharp. "Captain." She forced herself steady. "Keep moving." Her voice cracked just barely, but enough. The squad obeyed, though unease rippled through them. Inside, Elena's mind burned. She hadn't told them the truth, the real reason she had stepped forward. Because her brother hadn't just died here. He had disappeared here. And part of her had never stopped believing he was still out there, somewhere. The hollow wasn't just a mission for her, it was personal. Every step forward was a step toward him. Or toward the truth of what had happened. And the hollow wasn't finished with her yet. She should have felt relief. The ridgeline was behind them, the first checkpoint cleared, the valley widening into a stretch of open dirt road that led toward the village. But instead, a silence pressed in, a silence that didn't belong. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. Why was it so quiet? Sarah's boots sank half an inch into the fine dust, each step whispering louder than it should have. She raised her fist. The column halted. Every soldier froze, their eyes scanning, rifles shifting. She felt it before she saw it, that instinct, that gnawing certainty that they weren't alone. Her eyes swept the roofs ahead. Clay, broken timbers, empty windows like hollow eyes staring back. No shadows moved, no birds scattered, but the silence was wrong. Her heart beat harder, and she realized she'd been holding her breath. Behind her, Diaz whispered, "Ma'am." She didn't answer. She crouched, brushing her hand across the dirt. Her fingers came up coated in fine powder, too smooth, too uniform. That wasn't dust from the valley. It was residue. She looked up. The walls ahead carried faint marks, unnatural burns that spidered outward from a single point, blast shaping. An ambush site. Her chest tightened. For a second, memory overtook her, the smell of burnt metal, the scream of someone she couldn't save. A convoy years ago, a roadside torn open, a life lost because she'd seen the signs too late. Not this time. "Hold position," she whispered, her voice calm but edged with steel. "We're not walking into that." The men obeyed instantly. They trusted her eyes more than their own. Some still didn't understand why command had put her in charge, but they knew one thing: she noticed things others overlooked. But suspicion wasn't enough. She needed proof. Slowly she scanned again. Window, rooftop, the shadows at the corner of the old schoolhouse. There, a glint, too sharp, too controlled, catching a fraction of dying sunlight. Optics. Her pulse steadied. She dropped behind a broken wall, lifted her rifle, peered through her scope. For a fraction of a second she caught movement, a barrel shifting back, a scope retreating. Confirmed. "They're watching us," she said softly. The squad tensed. "Options," Diaz whispered. She studied the ground, replaying the map in her mind. If they advanced, they'd be cut down. If they retreated, they'd reveal weakness and lose their chance to reach the village. She remembered the captain's dismissive words during the briefing. "Sometimes, you overthink things, Major." She had no intention of repeating his mistake. "We don't go forward," she said finally. "We pull right through the ravine, quiet." The men exchanged uneasy glances. The ravine was steep, narrow, filled with rock slides. It would be slower, more dangerous terrain, but at least it wasn't a firing zone. "Copy," Diaz said, no hesitation in his tone. One by one, they peeled away, slipping into the shadows of the ravine. Sarah stayed behind until the last soldier moved, her rifle trained on the buildings. Her finger rested light on the trigger, her breathing controlled. For a moment, she wondered if they knew she had seen them. A memory flickered again, her brother sitting cross-legged on the porch, asking why she always seemed to notice things he couldn't. "Because I can't afford not to," she had told him. He had laughed. He hadn't lived long enough to see the weight of that answer. Now the weight felt heavier than ever. The ravine closed around them like a throat. Stone walls rising on both sides, shadows stretching long. The soldiers moved carefully, boots sliding on loose gravel. The sound of shifting rocks echoed too loud in the confined space. Every slip felt like a signal flare. Sarah kept her pace steady, every sense alive, listening, watching, waiting. Halfway through, Diaz leaned closer. "Ma'am, you really think they were ready to fire?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence hang, her eyes fixed on the jagged opening ahead where light spilled faintly through. Then, quietly, "If we'd taken one more step forward, we'd already be dead." His jaw tightened. He didn't ask again. But she wasn't finished. Because something about the setup bothered her. The glint, the silence, the residue, it all felt too staged, too obvious, like they had wanted her to notice. Why? That question clung to her thoughts as the ravine opened onto a plateau. The squad spread out automatically, rifles sweeping arcs, scanning for threats. The view stretched wide, the village now to their left, the mountains rising to their right. It should have felt safer here. It didn't. Because when she looked back toward the village, the rooftops were empty. The glint was gone. The silence still pressed in. Almost as if the enemy hadn't been waiting to ambush them. Almost as if the enemy had been waiting to see what she would do. And that meant only one thing. They knew who she was. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, though the air was cool. The idea cut deeper than any bullet, because she had lived in shadows for years, operating quiet, faceless, nameless. Every mission, every step designed to erase her presence from the record. If they knew her now, if they were baiting her, then her past wasn't as hidden as she thought. The squad waited for orders. None of them sensed what she did. None of them knew the fear tightening in her chest. But she couldn't let it show. She straightened, her voice calm. "We keep moving, stay sharp, no mistakes." They obeyed without hesitation. And yet, as they pushed forward into the lengthening light, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching not the squad, but her. A stone tumbled down the slope. Every head snapped toward the sound, rifles raised. The clatter echoed through the plateau, then died into silence. Nothing moved. The dust hung in the air, drifting like smoke. But Sarah didn't lower her weapon. Because it wasn't the rock that made her pulse quicken. It was the timing, too neat, too deliberate. Someone wanted them to look that way. Her eyes swept the ridge opposite. Barren rock, thin grass, no cover. But something about the angles, the shadows, the way the slope dipped toward a hollow, her gut whispered danger. She raised her hand, signaling a halt. The squad froze, spread in a defensive arc. No sound but the faint wind. Diaz's voice barely broke a whisper. "You see something?" She kept her scope fixed, her jaw tight. Not yet. But she felt it. The same way she'd felt it the night her brother never came home. The same way she'd felt it in the convoy seconds before the explosion. That ache in her bones that said danger was already inside the moment, coiled and waiting. Then she caught it, a shimmer, barely visible against the rock, like heat mirage except the air was cool. Camouflage. Her heart stopped for half a beat, then started again, slower, steadier. She leaned close to Diaz. Two on the ridge, cloaked, watched the hollow. He stiffened, but he didn't question. His trust in her was no longer hesitant, it was instinct. The rest of the squad shifted subtly, their rifles tilting, their bodies angling as if stretching legs, scratching chins. To anyone watching, they were still, but Sarah knew better. They were ready. And then the silence broke. A crack, sharp, a bullet slamming into stone inches from one soldier's boot, dust sprayed, shouts erupted, rifles barked. The plateau lit with muzzle flashes. But Sarah didn't fire. She didn't even flinch. Her eyes tracked the shimmer, her breath slow. One squeeze, one shot. The cloaked figure dropped, flickering back into visibility as it tumbled down the slope. The second broke cover, sprinting along the ridge. Sarah fired again, missed by an inch. Gravel exploded beside the runner. Her squad poured fire uphill. The figure vanished into jagged stone. Then silence again. The men panted, eyes wide, adrenaline spilling out in ragged breaths. One laughed nervously, another cursed under his breath. Diaz looked at her. "How the hell did you?" But he stopped, because he saw it in her eyes, the tightness, the calculation, the weight of something unspoken. She wasn't surprised. Not by the cloaks, not by the ambush, not even by the precision of it. No, what rattled her was the certainty that this wasn't random. This wasn't about the squad. It was about her. And she hadn't told them why, not yet. Her gaze drifted past Diaz, out toward the far horizon where the mountains cut sharp against the dying light. She saw another image there, overlaid like a ghost. Her brother's face, his eyes bright the day he shipped out, his grin reckless and alive. The grin she never saw again. He had died on a mission that was supposed to be classified, buried, erased. But she had read the files anyway. She had memorized them. And she had found one word scribbled in the margins of a report that should have been clean. A name. The same name whispered in intel briefs. The same signature behind black market weapons. The same shadow tied to ambushes across 3 valleys. And now, these cloaked soldiers carried gear with that same design. The enemy wasn't just defending this ground. They were the ones who had killed her brother. Her throat tightened, but she forced it down. Not now, not here. The squad was watching her, waiting. So she breathed once, deep, letting the anger cool into clarity. "We move," she said, "double pace, eyes open, we're not done yet." They obeyed, boots crunching in unison, rifles scanning arcs. But the silence never fully left. It clung to them heavy, like the shadow of something still stalking. As they descended from the plateau, the village loomed closer. Windows black, doors shut, not a sound of life. Diaz leaned close again, his voice low. "Ma'am, something about this doesn't add up, too empty." She glanced at him. His face was pale, sweat streaking dirt on his cheek. He wasn't wrong. "They cleared out," she said. "You think they knew we were coming?" Her pause was all the answer he needed. He swallowed hard, falling back into line. But Sarah's mind was already ahead, spinning with threads of memory and instinct. If the village was empty, it wasn't abandoned. It was staged, just like the glint, just like the cloaks. And somewhere inside that silence, inside that empty village, waited the truth she had been chasing for years. Her brother's ghost was pulling her forward. But she hadn't told the squad that. She hadn't told them this mission wasn't only about maps and orders. This was personal. And personal missions were the most dangerous kind. Still, her step never faltered. Because in the end, she knew one thing. Darkness would not clear itself. It took one person, one step, one choice to keep walking. And as she led them down into the shadowed streets of the village, Sarah knew that step would be hers. A door creaked somewhere ahead. Every rifle snapped toward the sound. But when they reached the street, the door stood ajar, swaying in the faint evening wind. Empty, silent. Too silent. Sarah raised her hand, signaling a slow advance. The squad spread out, shadows stretching long against the walls of mud and timber. The village smelled of dust and old wood, not smoke, not food, not life. Even the animals were gone. It wasn't abandoned, it had been emptied. Her boots brushed broken pottery, the crunch sharp in the stillness. She felt her breath deepen, controlled. A memory slid across her mind, her brother's last letter, the one that smelled faintly of oil and smoke. "Don't worry about me. Villages like these aren't dangerous. It's the silence you need to watch for." He had been right, and silence had killed him. Now silence surrounded her again. Diaz edged close, voice barely audible. "Where is everyone?" She shook her head, Not here, not now. But the truth pressed heavy. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had cleared the village deliberately. And then she saw it. A mark on the wall of the schoolhouse, faded, scratched deep into the clay. A symbol she had seen once before, buried in intel reports she wasn't supposed to read. A circle, broken by a jagged line. Her stomach knotted. That symbol belonged to the same group, linked to her brother's death. Her pulse slowed. Her throat tightened. She reached out, her gloved fingers brushing the mark, tracing its rough edge. Behind her, Diaz asked, "What does it mean?" She didn't answer, not yet. Because her chest was heavy with something she couldn't share, not with them, not until she knew for sure. The squad pushed deeper into the streets. Shadows filled every doorway. Windows were dark mouths. The air pressed down like a weight, suffocating. Then a sound broke it. Not a gunshot, not a shout. A voice. Thin, weak, from the corner building. Sarah froze. The men froze with her. It was a child's voice, calling faintly in a language most of them didn't understand, but she did. She had studied it long before. The voice said one word, over and over. "Wait." Her throat burned. She lifted a fist, motioning the squad to hold. Then she moved alone, slow, rifle raised, boots silent on the dirt. The building was half collapsed, timbers jutting like broken ribs. The voice came from inside, soft, ragged. She stepped through the doorway and saw her. A girl, barely 10 years old. Dust streaked her face, her dress torn. She sat against the wall, clutching a cloth bundle tight to her chest, her eyes wide, hollow with fear. Sarah lowered her rifle, her breath caught. For a second the world blurred. She saw another face, her brother's daughter, the one she had promised to visit but never had the chance. Her chest cracked open. The girl whispered again, "Wait." Sarah crouched slowly, hands open, her voice steady though her heart trembled. "It's okay, you're safe now." The girl shook her head violently. Tears streaked through the dirt on her cheeks. She pressed the bundle tighter. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Not a doll, not food, something heavier. Her stomach twisted. "Ma'am," Diaz's voice hissed from behind. "What is it?" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. Because the girl's trembling hands shifted, and the bundle slipped open just enough to reveal the edge of metal. Wires. A faint red light blinking once. Her breath froze. The girl wasn't holding a doll. She was holding a bomb. And her first thought wasn't of fear. It was of her brother, of his convoy, of the villagers who had been forced to carry death in their arms because someone else had decided they were expendable. History was repeating itself. But not this time. Sarah leaned closer, her voice a whisper, gentle, steady. "It's okay, I understand." The girl's eyes widened. Confusion, fear, hope. "Give it to me," Sarah said softly. "I'll carry it." The squad behind her shifted uneasily. She could feel their fear pressing in, their need to act, to shoot, to stop. But one wrong move and the child would die. And Sarah had already lived through one death too many. The girl hesitated, her small fingers shook. Then slowly she loosened her grip. Sarah took the bundle carefully, pressing it close to her own chest. The faint red light blinked again, steady, unhurried. She forced a breath, forced calm, forced her hands not to tremble. Then she turned, meeting Diaz's stunned eyes. "Get her out," she said. He hesitated. "Ma'am." "Now." Her tone left no space for argument. He grabbed the girl, lifting her gently, carrying her out into the fading light. The rest of the squad followed, forming a shield. And Sarah stood alone in the broken building, the weight of the bomb heavy in her arms, the faint light blinking against her chest. For a long moment she stared at it and whispered, barely audible, "Not again." The red light blinked steady against her chest. Each pulse a heartbeat, not hers, not the child, something colder, mechanical, counting down to nothing. Sarah's breath stayed slow, calm on the outside, but inside every nerve screamed. Why here, why a child? Because they wanted her broken. They wanted her choices to crush her, just like before. Her brother's face came back again. That last mission report, the scribbled name, the convoy explosion. He hadn't died because of chance. He had died because someone had turned civilians into weapons. And now they were doing it again, to her. She looked down at the bundle. Wires knotted in crude twists, metal scraped and mismatched, but the blinking core clean, professional, deliberate. Someone had supplied this. Someone had planned this. Her hand trembled once before she clenched it still. Diaz's voice crackled faint over comms. "Ma'am, status." She didn't answer, not yet. Because she knew the truth. If she said what she was holding, command would order retreat, extraction, abandonment. They'd write the girl off as collateral. They tell her to walk away. And Sarah could not walk away. Not again. Her knees pressed into the dirt floor as she lowered the bundle carefully. The red light blinked steady. Blink, blink. Her fingers hovered above the wires. Memory surfaced. Her brother teaching her how to fix radios. Wires spread across the porch table, his grin wide as he teased her for mixing red with black. "Slow down, Sarah. Wires aren't scary. They're just choices." "Choices." She exhaled. "Okay," she whispered. She pulled her knife, slid it carefully under the first wire close to the circuit. She froze, waited, listened. Blink, blink. She cut. Nothing. Her lungs released air she hadn't known she'd trapped. But it wasn't done. 3 more wires, each one could end everything. The door creaked behind her. She spun, knife still in hand. It was Diaz. His face was pale, his rifle low, his eyes locked on the blinking bundle. "Ma'am," his voice cracked, "what are you doing?" She steadied herself, finishing it. "You shouldn't be alone in here." "I have to be." He shook his head, stepping closer. "No, you don't." For a moment she saw something in him. Not just fear, not just loyalty, something human. The same look she had seen in her brother's eyes years ago, the belief that no one should carry the weight alone. Her throat tightened, but her hands didn't stop. Another wire cut. The light blinked faster. Diaz flinched, it speeding up. "Stay calm," she said, her voice level, though sweat slid down her spine. Her heart pounded now, not steady, not controlled, but she forced her breath to anchor her hands. She thought of the girl. She thought of her brother. She thought of the silence she had carried all these years, the guilt like a stone pressing down. And she knew, if she stopped now, if she backed away, she would never forgive herself. So she leaned closer, whispered under her breath, "You don't get to take another one from me." The third wire cut. The light blinked faster still, urgent, demanding. Diaz's breath hitched. "Ma'am." Her jaw locked. Last one. Her knife hovered. She closed her eyes for half a second, saw her brother's grin, heard his words. "Wires aren't scary, they're just choices." She opened her eyes. Her hand moved. She cut. Silence. The light died. Her chest collapsed in a shuddering breath she couldn't hold back. Sweat dripped from her temple, stinging her eyes. Diaz let out a gasp, half laugh, half sob. He dropped to his knees beside her, pressing his hands to his face. Jesus Christ. But Sarah didn't laugh, didn't smile. She stared at the dark, lifeless bundle, and for the first time in years, she felt a sliver of something pierce through the guilt. Relief. But it didn't last, because the silence outside shifted. Not wind, not footsteps. Engines. Low, rumbling, approaching from the east. Diaz heard it too, his head snapped up. Convoy. Her stomach turned cold, she knew that sound. Armored trucks, heavy, too heavy for simple patrols. They weren't leaving. This wasn't the end of the trap. It was only the beginning. She rose slowly, wiping her knife clean, sliding it back into its sheath. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. "Get everyone ready, we hold here." Diaz swallowed, staring at her. Against that. Her gaze drifted to the girl outside, her small frame clutching Diaz's jacket, eyes wide with fear. And Sarah's voice cut sharp, unshaken. "We hold." Because she knew, this was no longer about maps or orders. This was about every silent face forced into carrying someone else's war. This was about redemption. And she would not run from it. The fire had burned out, but the memory of it clung like smoke to every soul who had walked through it alive. The battlefield was quiet now, not in peace, but in the way silence follows a storm that has left more destruction than beauty. Craters marred the earth. Blackened steel twisted upward like skeletal fingers. The ground was littered with ashes, fragments of uniforms, and the faint, bitter tang of gunpowder that even rain could not wash away. Yet amid that silence, there remained one name, carried on hushed voices, on grateful sighs, and in the tears of hardened soldiers. Sergeant Elena Ramirez. The funeral that was. Officially, she wasn't supposed to be there. On the roster, her name hadn't even been listed for deployment. A clerical mistake had left her file buried beneath stacks of bureaucracy, forgotten by the very system she had sworn to protect. But every soldier in Bravo Company knew the truth. If not for her, none of them would be alive. The commanding officers, embarrassed by their oversight, wanted to gloss over her presence in the after-action reports. "Maintain the records clean," one colonel muttered. "It avoids questions." But the soldiers who had lived through that night refused silence. They refused to let her memory be filed away in the footnotes of a war. And so, while the official pages stayed blank, the men and women who had walked through hell beside her built their own remembrance. They gathered quietly at dusk, away from the eyes of command. A line of weary survivors stood shoulder to shoulder in a ruined courtyard, their boots sunk deep into the mud. At the center stood her rifle, planted upright into the soil, her helmet balanced gently on top. A crude cross formed by scavenged metal leaned behind it, glowing faintly in the firelight. No bugle sounded. No officers gave speeches. It was the silence of broken voices, the tremor of hands that remembered how she had carried them when their own legs had failed. One by one, soldiers stepped forward. Some left medals, some left dog tags of fallen friends, some left nothing but tears. Private Hale, the youngest of them, whispered, "She carried me out when I couldn't breathe. I'd be gone if not for her." Corporal Davis clenched his jaw, pressing a blood-stained patch onto the dirt. "She didn't just carry us. She carried our fear. She carried our hope, and she never once asked to be seen." The night ended with no anthem, no orders, only a quiet promise that her name would never be forgotten, not by those who owed her their lives. The voices she left behind. The survivors scattered with time. The war dragged on, pulling each of them to new fronts, new battles, new nightmares. But her shadow followed them everywhere. In the barracks, stories of her acts became bedtime whispers for recruits who had never met her. In briefing rooms, her name was spoken like a warning and a prayer. "She carried them through fire," they said, "and she'll carry you if you let her courage live in you." Some soldiers wore her initials carved into their helmets. Others etched her face into the metal of their rifles. A few wrote letters to her, knowing they'd never be read, tucking them inside vest pockets before marching into combat. To them, Elena wasn't just a comrade. She had become an anchor in a sea of chaos, proof that someone could rise above fear when the world demanded it most. The war report that changed everything. Months later, an independent journalist embedded with the unit stumbled upon the truth. In hushed tones and shaking voices, survivors told him what official records had not, how a forgotten soldier had carried half a company out of fire. The report spread quietly at first, like a rumor no one wanted to believe. Then it caught flame. Across the country, families read her name. They saw her picture, one the soldiers had smuggled from their private collection, a candid shot of her laughing in the dust, sleeves rolled up, eyes squinting in sunlight. Not the face of a legend, the face of someone painfully, beautifully human. And that was what made it real. News outlets demanded answers, politicians stammered, generals muttered about clerical errors and unverified accounts. But soldiers in the field didn't wait for confirmation. They already knew. For them, the myth of Elena Ramirez wasn't born in headlines. It was born in the memory of her back beneath their weight as she carried them, one after another, through walls of fire and fear. 4. The legacy and training grounds. Years passed, and war turned into uneasy peace. The next generation of recruits walked into training grounds carrying gear that felt heavier than their own skin. But among the drills and shouts, there lingered a new tradition. When exhaustion broke them, when mud and sweat made them collapse, instructors would murmur one phrase: "Remember Elena." Cadets who didn't know her story yet would ask, and they'd be told, of the soldier who wasn't even supposed to be there, who lifted others when she should have fallen herself. They would learn not from manuals, not from statistics, but from her forgotten name spoken like scripture in the dirt. And in every class, at least one recruit would whisper silently, "If she could carry them through fire, then I can carry this weight too." 5. The ghost in the field. Sometimes, veterans swore they still saw her. On the edge of smoke-filled valleys, in the last seconds before an ambush, when exhaustion blurred vision and fear gripped the heart, a silhouette seemed to walk ahead of them. A woman, rifle slung across her back, moving steady, carrying weight that was not hers to bear. Some called it imagination, others called it a ghost, but every soldier who claimed it said the same thing, that in those moments their legs steadied, their breath returned, and courage burned again like fire in their chest. Maybe she was gone, or maybe in the way of true heroes she had never really left. 6. A daughter's discovery. Years later, long after medals had tarnished and war had shifted into the pages of history, a young girl stood in an archive. Her name was Sofia Ramirez. She was Elena's niece, born after the war, never knowing her aunt except through faded photographs hidden in a shoebox under her mother's bed. She had come to learn, to understand why people whispered her family's name like a prayer. The archivist handed her a file, unmarked, buried in misfiled records, just like Elena had been. Inside were fragments, a deployment map with her name scratched out, testimonies from soldiers who had scrawled words in the margins, desperate to keep her alive in ink if not in memory. Sophia read every word, tears dripping onto the pages, and when she stepped outside into the open sun, she whispered a vow. "They may have forgotten your name in their rosters, but I will make sure the world remembers." 7. A name written in stone. Years after Sophia's discovery, a memorial was unveiled in the capital. Rows upon rows of names etched in cold granite, each representing lives lost, sacrifices made. At first, Elena's name wasn't there. But when the veterans of Bravo Company learned of this, they marched, they wrote, they refused silence. And one day, beneath an overcast sky, a chisel cut into stone, carving her name where it had always belonged: Sergeant Elena Ramirez. The veteran stood before it, hands trembling, eyes red. Private Hale, now older, leaned against his cane and whispered, "You carried us through fire. Now we'll carry your name through time." 8. The eternal fire. The war faded, as wars always do, into stories told by the old to the young. But some stories refused to die. In classrooms, her story was taught not as strategy, but as spirit. In training camps, her name was invoked when courage faltered. And in the quiet moments, when soldiers faced choices that felt unbearable, they remembered her, the one who carried them when all hope should have burned away. She had been forgotten in the roster. but she was remembered forever in the fire she walked through and the lives she carried out of it. Because sometimes the greatest heroes are not the ones with medals on their chest or speeches in their honor. Sometimes they are the ones who step forward when no one asks, who carry weight that isn't theirs, who disappear into smoke only to rise again in memory. And so, as long as soldiers marched, as long as fear weighed heavy, the legend of Sergeant Elena Ramirez lived on, not as a myth, but as a truth burned into every heart that dared to fight and endure. Her fire never died. It lived in them.